And welcome to Newsbroads with Judy Licht, Gina Cerrito, and Lynn White.
We have just come through an historic midterm election. Record turnouts, more than 100 women elected to Congress, many young people voting, many more than in other midterm elections.
And as Newsbroads, or women of the news, we're always looking to find out what part the media might have played in all of this.
And here to answer that question and others is Dr. Michael Pagano, who is the Dean of the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Welcome, Mike.
Good morning. Thank you.
So big election, either side of the aisle, right? There was a winner on one side or the other. But we're wondering what part the news media might have played in all of this, because, you know, we're hearing fake news on one side and another side has got the media that's pretty much telling the right story, but also being castigated for it.
Yeah, I think part of the answer to that question really has to do with the demographics. People who are over a certain age tend to receive their news and information about the election and candidates from fairly standard sources, or at least what we used to call standard sources, and those are the newspapers, television, magazines, but under a certain age, somewhere around under 30 or so, the news information is less consumed via those old traditional routes than it is through their Twitter accounts, their other social media accounts, and they end up getting bits and blips and blurbs and blops of information from a number of sources, whatever they sign up for or whatever comes across their phones at the time. So it's a different source of information. They tend to share information. The younger people tend to share information more than the older people do, and you can see that it seems to have had an impact in getting the vote out. There was a very large turnout of young people this time.
But do you feel that social media is maybe contributing to more of the polarization? Because it's so easy to get something bad out and have it go viral so quickly. There's
Sure.
some feeling about that, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. Social media, because you control it, unlike if you are in the receiving business of just receiving whatever the newspaper or the television tells you, you can pick and choose whom you want to hear. And it tends to have the effect of reinforcing your views. And so we end up segmenting the news market through social media in a way that may produce even more polarization. Indeed, this may be the downside of social media and media in general, because people are choosing what to watch and what to listen to. I think the commentary about the Republican Party becoming more of a Trump party than a moderate party, and the Democratic Party becoming more of a progressive party than a moderate party, the social media may be contributing to that.
So how does the media, what is their responsibility now? If their responsibility has changed, what is their responsibility moving forward? How do they keep up with this change?
Well, the news media, the news media, from my perspective, the news media's purpose is to inform and educate the people, in this case, about the important policy issues that are confronting the American people. And to the extent that they do not inform or educate, but rather polarize and alienate, I think they're not performing their duty. If they want to be, just another interest group, that's fine. But the news media, as the only industry identified in the U.S. Constitution, needs to maintain the integrity of providing news and educating the public, and not for the purpose of polarizing or accentuating or in otherwise misguiding or misinforming the people.
That's very interesting, because in this last election, you saw a lot of pushback from Sean Hannity, who was out and about with the president, actually campaigning. Jeanine Pirro there as well, Rush Limbaugh. That seemed to many in our industry, in the news media, to have crossed a line. Because are you giving us the facts and telling us the news, or are you supporting a candidate? When those lines become blurred, things and outcomes change.
I absolutely agree. At the time of the founding of the nation, in fact, probably for the first 100 or 150 years, newspapers were very clear, and that's how we received our information, through the newspapers. Newspapers were very clearly on one side or the other. They would support the candidate of, say, the Republican Party or the Whig Party. And you knew that by subscribing to this newspaper, you were going to receive a newspaper that endorses the principles of that political party. I think in the last 100 years, we've come to understand that news media can be much more eclectic than that, provide numerous perspectives and ideas, and certainly happened with the advent of television after World War II in particular. But at that point, it became, because there were so few, the technology was so expensive, there were so few news outlets that it was really controlled by three major networks. With social media and the explosion of the internet in the 90s in particular, now we have access to everything again. We've sort of fragmented, the society has fragmented in a similar way as it did in the early 19th century, except it's more fragmented on the basis of policy issues than it is necessarily on the basis of a political party.
So what you're really saying is 'twas ever thus. It's only this sort of brief shining moment on the hill when you had the three networks and they felt the responsibility to be fair, and there was the fairness doctrine
That's right.
that the FCC enforced. But today I like that you put it in perspective, because it's not as if the media was suddenly becoming polaristic. It was always polarizing, always polarizing. And the problem we have now is, can we return from that? I mean, I think the advent of cable television was truly, because you've got Fox on one side, you've got MSNBC on the other, and you have varying others somewhere in between.
And then you also, may I add, you also have a president who's got a whole network that's basically supporting him, which we've never seen before. So that shifts the power in another direction. I think, like you're saying, once that genie is out of the bottle, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that's our big thing, is like, what's next? How do we understand, and thank you for that history, to understand really how it evolved and how it came. But I think everyone's kind of stuck onto the what's next, because they're so worried about their party winning or their candidate winning instead of information.
Right.
And how do we do that?
Yeah, I think that's the $64,000 question. I'm not sure how we do that, but I do think that trends like this tend to reach a breaking point. Whether it was the breaking point of the Civil War, in which the nation literally fragmented, or whether it is the kinds of issues that we reach so far in one direction that the middle, and I think the middle still is important, that the middle becomes a ground where we can meet and work through our differences of opinion and of policy preferences. But it seems to me that we've got to polarize first before we realize that there's a middle. So the pendulum is still swinging. I think the election yesterday demonstrated that the pendulum did not come back to the middle. It actually went further to both sides. But I think pendulums can only go so far before we start being pulled back to the middle. The questions that you are raising, I think, are precisely the kinds of questions that we all start to raise now. And that is, how can we continue to be as polarized and as fragmented as we have been drawn over the last, it's been more than just the Trump presidency. He's just polarized and accelerated and identified extremes that we haven't seen for a long time. Now, we've had these things before. Remember, we used to have members of Congress, they were all men, congressmen beating up congressmen in the halls of Congress.
That's very true.
It's not that we haven't seen this kind of raucous behavior before.
I just have never seen the tribalism that we're seeing now, and the labeling and the hate and the bigotry. And that seems to be a dark road.
But maybe that's because you weren't living in those times. I mean,
I think
Dr. Pagano has pointed out that back in those days, there really was that kind of hatred. What worries me now is, to your point, Lynn, and to your point as well, Dr. Pagano, is how we get out of it. Because David Brooks, who's one of my favorite analysts, just wrote a column. He's crisscross the country. And what he's found is that there are two Americas right now. Yeah. There is the rural America, which is red state. There is the urban and suburban America, which is blue state. And there is the college-educated woman who votes Democratic. There is the non-college educated man who's mostly voting Republican. And each side sees the other as the reason this country is unraveling. And the question is, I'm not even certain, and you brought this up, I'm not even certain what kind of presuming Trump even gets reelected the next time, what happens after that to bring this together again, to change the dialectic, if you will. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But does it take a tragedy?
Hold on.
Like a 9/11?
Certainly.
Hold on, Dad. Pause.
Pause.
What's that?
I said pause.
Pause.
Don't
We have a technical problem just for a sec.
Hold that thought.
I lost a lot of your conversation.
Yeah,
it went out.
That's what he's going to fix.
But I got the gist of it.
Okay.
I understand what you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
I think everything's fine.
Okay.
All right, do you
Should
want
we
me to
pick it up?
repeat that question or that long-winded
Why don't you
question?
just do the direct question, that last question?
Okay, we're still rolling.
Do you want me to mention the David Brooks thing? No?
I think he got that. I think it's right after that.
With these two Americas, both Americas looking at the other side as unraveling the democracy pretty much. How do we get past it, even if Trump's elected the next time? Whoever's elected after Trump, let's say it's a dialectic opposition, a Democrat, a progressive Democrat. How do we get out of that feeling that there's them and us and we don't like them?
Oh, I don't think we get out of it in the sense that there's a magic bullet and we all come together, even if there were a 9/11. And remember, at the time of 9/11, we were fairly polarized at the time.
We were.
George W. did not win the popular vote, and if it wasn't for Florida and the Supreme Court, who knows, right? So we were fairly polarized at the time, but we came together over 9/11. It did unite the country around particular issues, but not around the values that were dividing and continue to divide the nation. So I don't see that no matter who wins the 2020 election or the 2024 election, that there will be a coming together of the disparate forces. In fact, this is a generational thing. This isn't going to happen overnight. I think David Brooks speaks to this rather eloquently in his columns about how societies are not made overnight. They build on community values. They build on dialogue and conversation and knowing your neighbor, knowing somebody.
And trusting
and that's
person.
changing. I feel like that part is changing.
If by
the trust is 2050, and I don't know if it was you that said it, but then 2050 that 80% of the U.S. is going to be more urban, and how that's going to change a lot of things.
Yes. Yeah. So I think I would be careful in how we identify what the factions are right now. The college-educated women tend to vote more Democratic, but when it's only 52 to 55%, that means there's still a large minority of educated women who are not voting Democratic. Right. And same thing for the rural areas and the urban areas. The urban areas did, in many cases, vote overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. But there were other urban places that were much more balanced. That it wasn't the Washington, D.C. vote, which was amazing, that Hillary Clinton won. It was either 94, 96% of the popular vote. That's an amazing fragmentation of that area where almost everybody is for Hillary Clinton.
Right.
So I think just because the nation becomes more urbanized does not necessarily mean that we move away from tribalism. In fact, if you look at some of the larger cities, Chicago is one of those where I live, it is the most racially fragmented city and class fragmented city in the country.
And is that what it comes down to? Because when you think about this country and how it was born with slaves. Women had no rights. There was division, and then we had a war. So again, it feels like this is a part of our culture that we have to figure out, or else we will annihilate ourselves.
I don't disagree, and we have not addressed those issues that united the country during the Revolutionary War, where it was really uniting free landholders and men and white men. And if you didn't fit into that category, what were you fighting for?
Right.
And now we've expanded suffrage. We've eliminated slavery. That doesn't mean that we've eliminated, or we have made many changes for the better, in my view. But we still have a long way to go.
Well, without sounding too depressing, the one sort of ray of hope I'm hearing in your voice is that if we just grow up, i.e., the generational change may change things. I'm hearing that as a kind of glimmer of hope in your voice. Am I misinterpreting it?
You're not. I think the young people, the millennials, they are selectively pulling information, but they are also connecting with people beyond their immediate, their immediate small group in their small town or their neighborhood or their block or their city. They're reaching out beyond that and realizing there's a very large world out there of people who don't look like them, who don't worship the same God, who don't have the same income, and understanding that we face the world very differently. If you come from a very homogeneous arena, and that's all you have contact with is people who look like me, then why think about others who are in different positions? I think the millennials with social media, they can do that.
Positive side of the
Yes.
social media. This is the positive side of, even if they're only getting articles that they, fulfill them in the way that they want to be fulfilled, at least they're still getting out there and gathering. They're still having something that they can talk about when they're at the table, or even on the comments of articles that I think a lot of older people try to shy away from. And I see that as maybe that is a positive step towards, like you said, just growing up.
Well, I think that's the message. America, grow up.
Yes, and you know what? The grown-ups should look to the kids that are coming up, because those are the kids of the future, and they do not see race. They do not see gender. They do not see religion. They are more open-minded and worldly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. You've made us feel
I enjoyed this
a
very
little
much.
bit
Thank you
better.
for inviting me.
Thanks. I hope the weather in Chicago stays great.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's 30 degrees today and cloudy. It's perfect day.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Well, there's a hopeful note. I mean,
Yes.
because it's been pretty depressing post election, and I have to say I may not live to see it. You guys may, but
On that
it's sad,
point,
no,
God willing.
But maybe when my kids are voting now.
But isn't
maybe
that the point too? That we need to leave this a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
So this is our responsibility as not millennials to leave it better. That maybe giving them the reins and giving them more credit than the millennials. That maybe that's what's going to start healing us.
And I think it's the way of the world. Evolvement. We are constantly shifting our opinions and evolving. And that's
Not
the hope
taking
for the
steps
future.
back.
And I hope the Newsbroads live to see it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.